Are you all set? Yeah. Okay. Okay, here we go. Okay, call to order the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency meeting for today, Wednesday, June 22nd. If you please rise for a Pledge of Allegiance. Steve?
Hand over heart, ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call.
Chair Mulhart.
Here.
Vice Chair McCraven. Here. Director Bennett.
Here.
Director West.
Here.
Director Borchard.
Here. Okay, agenda review. Jeff.
Couple of items for your consideration, Chair. Board Member Craven has a city council meeting tonight and may have to leave a little bit early. We'd like to ask that item 7 be moved to the top of the agenda with your permission. And one other item to cover, a board member has requested that the special meeting to be held in July, on July 8th, be moved to the week of July 11th if possible, and would like to maybe review a date and time for that week with your board at this time.
You want to do that now?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Okay. Hold on. Okay, so July, it'd be July 15th? It shows July 15th? That's what you're looking at?
Oh, that week was the request we got.
The 13th is United's board meeting. That's a Wednesday. So,
What time of day are we?
The week won't work for me. The whole week won't work for me. The board is dark and I will be gone. The board of supervisors is dark. So, you can go on without me or?
Friday would be a good day to use this room, if you want to take that into consideration.
Okay.
Your alternate will probably be going too.
Reasonable chance.
okay, go to the following week. The week of the 18th, July, the week of the 18th. How's that look?
Monday. The 20th looks good.
The 20th looks good.
Does not work for me.
What days of that week work for you? None?
None. Yeah, I've got Tuesday and Wednesday that I'm here and I'm gone the other days.
And you're full on Wednesdays?
Full on Tuesday and Wednesday, yeah. Well, let me I might be able to squeeze something in on Wednesday.
What about Wednesday the 6th?
Hold on,
I'm
Wednesday the
gone.
20th, I might be able to squeeze it in.
I'm gone that whole week.
Come on, technology.
Monday the 18th.
Well, the only day Steve's here Tuesday.
I could go in the afternoon.
Okay.
I could go 1:30 on the 20th, most likely.
Okay, let me ask this question. Is the agenda item so significant that we have to have a special board meeting that close to the regular board meeting that we can't roll it into the regular board meeting?
The item of concern, as I understand it, was the appointment of the alternate for the agricultural member.
So it's a,
No, I think the special meeting is regarding the new consultant, is it not?
Oh, the special meeting is, but the item in the email had to do with the ag.
No, I'm just
Sorry.
wanting to get that done sooner than later is all.
Okay,
I'm just having a problem with the 8th myself.
okay.
So do I.
and so do I. All right, so
The afternoon of the 20th?
the afternoon
Afternoon of the 20th,
of the 20th,
1:30?
if we do that, Steve, what would be the backup day in the event that you're saying that's not possible?
Well, his alternate.
Alternate, yeah. John may be available.
Yeah.
All right, you okay with that?
Sure.
So let's set it for July 20th at 1:30. Okay, everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, all right, that's what it'll be.
Can we combine the 20, The meeting the next week and that one?
We are.
Okay, so we're combining them, okay.
Are you going to combine it?
Well,
There will
we
be-
could, but if, you might want to consider just holding it on the 27th instead of holding on the 20th. We have this room guaranteed on the 27th. The 20th's up in the air.
The preliminary agenda, is it so?
Did you push the button, Charlotte?
It's green.
Oh, there. Sorry. The preliminary agenda that was sent out yesterday didn't look like it had two large items. So is there, if there's something else that's scheduled for the 27th,
No, we can do it either way.
Okay, if that's the case, then let's do it all on the 27th.
I would prefer we do it all on the 20th, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry, the 20th.
I know I'm going to be here
Oh,
in the morning and in the evening.
Our
and so
our
it's
normal period is the fourth Wednesday of the
27th.
month, so we're moving both agendas up to the 20th.
That'd be okay with me.
You okay with that, from a staff standpoint?
Yes, we'll have to find a room.
Okay. All right, so what we'll do then is we'll combine the July 27th normal meeting date will be rolled into the July 20th meeting date.
Good.
Okay? All right. Anything else? Okay. With regards to your request to have item 7 moved first, I'm wondering if there ought to be a discussion of the item 3 that precedes item 7.
you'll move it up to after item 3.
Well, we could move item 3 up and then 7 and deal with item 2 if you want, but I would think
Could we do
that
it that way?
there ought to be some discussion of so everybody can hear what's going on about the supply policy, and then we can deal with item 7, because there's impact
That makes
both
sense.
ways. Okay, you all right with that?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll change the agenda to be, sequence will be item 3, item 7, and then 2, and the rest of it in sequence. Everybody okay with that? Any objection? Okay, so that'll be the order. Anything else, Jeff? Okay, public comments. Anybody in the public want to make some comments that are not on the agenda?
Good afternoon, Chair. My name is Peter Golden, and I'm here on behalf of Loma Water Company.
Excuse me, I can't hear you.
Is that? Yeah.
Yeah, that's why.
Yeah. There we go.
There we go. Is
Thank
that
you.
better?
Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.
No,
So-
thank you.
Because it has to go into tape, Peter. If you just start all over again.
Sure. I'm happy to repeat. My name's Peter Goldering. I'm counsel for La Loma. My folks are here. Del Norte is also here, and they'll be talking to you about the same issue. They and we have been seeking to obtain permits for in our case, a backup or replacement well since January. The staff has been struggling with the issue that there is a very, very small portion of the acreage in my client's larger world that is within outcrop or expansion area. It's less than 1 or 2%. And originally today we were given to understand was going to be an agendized staff report for a policy conversation because of the tension in the ordinances on what to do in that context. And we and Del Norte were going to hopefully be talking to you about that. We learned on Friday that it was not agendized and that instead staff's position was that my client would be given a well permit only if 100% of all of the water was changed from ag to M&I. And so for what are roughly, for example, 2 acres in the expansion area, all of the water would convert to M&I, which is, at least to my small water company, about $160,000 plus issue. And we don't want to come to the board in a fight about a permit condition, and I don't think Del Norte does. And my impression was your staff wanted some policy conversation around what do we do, because we're really talking about a bridge from now to when the larger plan is put in place. So we're asking for you to consider, and I get it, it's public comments, but we're asking for you to consider engaging with staff perhaps after you hear the other folks commenting around agendizing as soon as you possibly can the conversation, because then we can work through some practical alternatives, sub-metering or whatever may work around accomplishing this as opposed to being on a conflicted issue. So that's the purpose of my comments, and I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Good afternoon. Neil McGuire on behalf of the Del Norte Water Company. We are also in a similar situation as Aloma with regard to an application for a replacement well. There are some big picture policy issues that are influencing the consideration of that permit that really go back to the Ordinance 4 from the late 80s, some variances that were granted after that. And we appreciate staff's willingness to look for a path forward. We do think that that path, which would involve, like La Loma, the conversion of the entirety of the Del Norte system into an M&I operator, is probably a path that paints with a very, very broad brush. We think it would be helpful to have a discussion with the board members about whether there's an opportunity to address the issue in a more surgical fashion. So like La Loma, we would very much appreciate if it could be agendized, if that issue could be agendized, so that we could have that discussion, hopefully come up with a resolution that allows staff to move forward in a way that addresses the GMA's concerns, the enforcement of the GMA ordinances, but also allows us, again, a path forward that does not pull out a splinter with a hacksaw by redesignating these entities as M&I. So we'd appreciate your consideration in that regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Chair, if I might just chime in a bit. I spoke with some of the participants after the LPUG meeting this morning, as well as Ms. Rydell of staff, and it does indeed seem to be that there's some policy issues that we need to address, and I would just ask the board if we can move on this sooner than later. These are two entities trying to drill wells that are in very precarious spots. The La Loma group has a marginal existing well that could fail at any time, and they need a backup. They've only got one supply source. And then the Del Norte system, as we've all heard, water levels are dropping, and they need a backup well to be able to better serve their constituents, and that's really behind the ball as well. And both of these need to get done as soon as possible. So we've got a lot on our plate, I understand, but if perhaps staff and the applicants can continue to converse, and maybe this gets solved before we need to get involved, but it does seem like there's a policy question that needs to get answered.
Jeff?
There are definitely some policy issues that your board needs to wrestle with. It's been our practice, per the request of LPUG, to kind of wrestle with them there first. But if LPUG wishes us to take it directly to the board, we can arrange that. This has all been well researched, and we think we have a firm recommendation for you. So we can get on your board fairly quickly, just it involves bypassing LPUG to a degree.
Okay. Is it your desire that if there's somehow we squeeze it into the 20th, put it on the board meeting for the 20th?
That would be great. I think the applicants would be most appreciative.
Can you do that? Can we do that? Okay. So let's see if we can get it on the agenda so we understand what the issues are and at least give some direction.
Another observation is you might want to run that through. It is a tangled web, and you might want to run that through the committee first, as a suggestion.
Which committee?
The policy committee, which is the executive committee.
You're going to be gone when?
I'm going to be gone till the 12th. So, so let's do it this way. you know what you have, and if you believe that the best way to deal with this is to go through a pre-policy committee, which is the executive committee, if you believe that's the right avenue, let's do that. Let's still have it on the agenda for the 20th so that the executive committee may or may not be in a position to make a recommendation to the board, but at least we'll get some chance to think about it and understand the issues. And what you'll have to do is you'll have to poll both Charlotte and I and find out what our calendar is for that time frame. Okay? All right, so let's do that. All right? Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else in the audience? Okay, let's go to board member comments.
I have one.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, first, I'll explain to everybody the Santa Barbara fire is 85% contained, and my allergy to the smoke is only 12% contained, so I'm raspy. The city sent me to something called the California Water Summit a couple of weeks ago, and there wasn't a whole lot that was pertinent to the city, but I did find some issues that were very interesting with regard to this organization. And being one of only 2 elected representatives who was in attendance for the whole time, I felt like maybe a freshman at a college fraternity party. Everybody was lining up to talk to me. And the group with the most people wanting to talk to me were actually, well, they clarified a whole lot, especially by the time I'd heard their 2 presentations. And so I'm a slow learner, and with the assumption that there are a few of you that didn't figure it all out either, I'm going to go ahead and explain a little bit. The one group was, there are actually 2 companies that do this, but one of them has people who have talked to us before. I never figured out why people involved with universities were out there talking to us about what do I want to say? The setting up of the water sales.
The water market.
The water market. And they both, the 2 companies had representatives who really pressed my hand a lot. The people who've talked to us in the past have been their stringers who are trying to get us involved, and they'll get a little bit of money out of it. But the people from Australia, and both groups are from Australia, are most interested in setting up the software for our water market. And as their presentations are all online at thirdcaliforniawatersummit.com. But it made it really clear that they want to develop our very costly IT systems to have the water market go, so that every one of you farmers can have your, as they put it, on your way to have coffee, put it into your cell phone, and by the time you get to the coffee shop and have ordered your coffee, your share of this year's allocation that you want to put on the market will be sold, and the money will be in your account. And it's getting the intertwining of the banks and everything and the security that's so expensive. And I thought, aha, that's the part I was missing before. So I now have it, and there was a lot there were a lot of other things in the presentation that one other thing I talked to Tully about, but I had an aha moment there.
Very good. Anybody else?
And of course, this company, if we were to select either one of them, would get a commission on every transaction.
Fee, yeah. Okay, anybody else? I failed to mention Robert. Where's Robert? Robert Aranio is in the audience. He's an alternate, and as I look around, there's some faces that are hidden. I don't see any other alternates in the room. Okay. All right. Let's go to consent calendar.
Move the approval.
Motion to approve.
So
And a second. Any objection? Okay, it's so ordered. All right, let's go to item number 3. Tully.
Good afternoon, Chair Mulhart and directors. I'm Tully Clifford, the Assistant Executive Officer for the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency. I'm here today to briefly discuss the brackish groundwater supply policy. The item was last heard by your board on May 13th, and we've attempted to capture your comments and suggestions and those of various stakeholders in the most recent version of the policy. However, I believe we could do a better job of aligning the policy with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and we actually request that your board continue this item until we've had the opportunity for additional stakeholder outreach. I feel at this stage we're at a critical time as we have the stakeholders fully engaged in this matter, and they're actually offering suggestions to create a viable policy and not one that seems arbitrary or deaf to the requirements of SGMA, and therefore the sustainability of the basins. And another thing that we found as an aside is that our website is not getting quite the robust use that we thought it was, and so when we placed items such as this on there for people to comment, it largely gets ignored. And so we're also going to be looking at the same time for additional ways to communicate, interact with the stakeholders so that we do get those comments back. And so that's our request today, that we actually move this item, continue this item so that we have additional opportunity for stakeholder outreach.
Okay, and the plan would be to move it to the July 20th board meeting? Now,
Yeah.
July 20th board meeting?
Yes, that would work. That's awfully tight from a time perspective, but we could certainly make that work.
It'll be on the agenda again for sure.
Okay.
Anybody object to staff's desires? Anybody in the audience have a comment on staff's desires? Al, do we need to vote on moving it? No. Okay, so let's just roll it to the 20th. Okay, very good. All right, now with that, let's go to item number 7.
Good afternoon, Chairman Mulhart and directors. For the record, my name is Kathleen Rydell, groundwater specialist, here to present the City of Camarillo North Pleasant Valley Desalter project update and request for feedback. Your board was last updated on the desalter project in June of 2015. Since then, agency staff and city representatives have met, and we have tightened up, or the city has tightened up, the monitoring and contingency plan. The city has submitted documents for the agency to review, and the agency has reviewed those documents. And since then, the city is now requesting an extraction authority, which is increased. At the last update, they were requesting 6,750 acre-feet per year. Currently, the request is for 9,000 acre-feet per year. So the city's proposed project is to construct and operate a desalter, pump 9,000 acre-feet per year, and produce 7,500 acre-feet per year of treated water. The left difference between that is the brine that would go down the brine line. They are seeking an additional pumping allocation authority beyond their current temporary extraction allocation. Their temporary extraction allocation reduced 20% is 3,196 acre-feet per year. The city has completed a supplemental environmental impact report, and that was certified by the city on Monday of this week, so that's June 20th. And the supplemental and the final EIR relies on the groundwater model that was created for this project. And the model in the report states that the results should be used cautiously and recommends monitoring to verify the model results. Therefore, the monitoring and contingency plan is very important. The monitoring and contingency plan has monitoring of groundwater levels, groundwater quality, the hydraulic gradient, groundwater levels. To go a little more into detail, this is a diagram from their plan showing monitoring points that they propose to use in this monitoring and contingency program. The groundwater levels, action levels, and triggers have been proposed, and the triggers, the action levels are in their table that is in the monitoring and contingency plan, as well as the actions such as when they reach the historic low of minus 168 foot elevation, they would have 100% pumping reduction for their project. Basically, pumping for the project would cease. They're proposing both installing new nested monitoring wells. Those are the darker blue circles. They have regional monitoring wells, which are shown within the lighter blue circles, and the dash circles are some lateral monitoring wells that we're doing final figuring out which well is going to be used.
Okay, let me stop you for a second. So the additional monitoring wells are what color?
They're the green dots.
Okay, those are the monitoring wells.
So these are the nested monitoring wells.
Okay.
Their pumping wells are the blue squares.
Okay.
There's 2 new wells, 2 existing wells. So the darker blue are their nested monitoring wells. They're going to use have 2 regional wells to look at, and then they're figuring out which well they're going to use for the lateral wells on either side of their pumping. And that is to help delineate the plume and to see what impacts are created or caused potentially by this project.
Okay.
So these are their extraction wells, and they have developed water quality triggers for determining which is fresh water, which is brackish water, what is with their pumping allocation, what is reported without a pumping allocation, where they would have to report it under their current existing allocation. So that has been developed. They have proposed checking the hydraulic gradient between these 2 locations. Should the gradient be such that it would trigger seawater intrusion or cause a worsening of the potential for seawater intrusion, that they have the actions here of pumping reductions associated with that. So that's in their monitoring and contingency plan. Additionally, they have monitoring of subsidence. They delineate what is going to be in their annual report. They propose notification should any action levels be reached, so that they would notify the agency in a timely manner. And in concurrence with the proposed brackish water policy that's going forth, agency staff recommends the plan be reviewed for refinement every 5 years. In conclusion, the project is designed to remediate the brackish water groundwater plume. The final plan was not yet available at the time the staff report was written, as it was certified on Monday. The project may reduce subsurface inflow to the Oxnard subbasin, but this would likely be tied to undesirable results associated with SGMA, and to extract more groundwater than is needed by the city and to export the extra water outside of the basin. And they're proposing to Port Hueneme and the city of Oxnard. Recommendations are to hear a presentation being presented by Tom Fox following me from the city of Camarillo, provide agency staff in the city with feedback regarding this project, and receive and file this report.
Okay. Anybody have any questions on that? Tom, please.
Well, as was mentioned, again, by the way, Tom Fox, Assistant City Manager for the City of Camarillo. I think when this project started, I was the traffic engineer, but So at least some progress has been made, I guess.
Which is worse?
Yeah, yeah.
Which department is worse?
As was mentioned, we were here a year ago discussing this project, and you gave us some homework items to go back and work on. And I'm pleased to be here with a feeling that I think we're here to address your concerns with some good answers. And so I do plan to really focus on what we've achieved over the last year. I'm not going to go back through the presentations you've seen our project in the past. You've seen those enough times that I think you're familiar with our project. So I won't focus on the benefits and the brackish mound as much as really what we've accomplished in the last year. And do I just forward into our slide? So keep going. So can you see this?
Yes. If it was in color, we could see it, but since you did it in black and white, we can't.
So I will just touch on maybe okay, we're good, we're up. So I'm going to go through some important items that are going back a ways and talking about history, but they're items we haven't really focused on before, and I think it's going to be important to create some context for the rest of this presentation. Of course, I'll touch on what we've identified as what we think the 4 main homework items were that you gave us. One, of course, was to update the monitoring and contingency plan. The other was and last year we had a certified environmental document, but your staff put us on notice that it needed to be revised to include the new information, so we've done that. The concern we heard loud and clear was it sounded like we were going to be exporting water from the Fox Canyon service area, and so we'll explain how that isn't the case. And then finally, last year we essentially had 2 competing projects for the same amount of water, and we've now joined and created a partnership, and we'll explain that. And then finally, and I know we don't like to talk about schedule and deadlines to drive policy, but you do need to at least understand some of the challenges we're under with as far as schedule is concerned. So as I promised, I won't go back to the past presentations, but the first slide I show you is from the past presentation. This is the only one that I've brought forward, and that is, again, really just to quickly summarize and recap that we do have in the center of Camarillo. This is an aerial photograph of Camarillo in the center and north end of the city. We have a brackish mound of water, and then we have the well locations. If we need to hearken back to this illustration for further discussion, we have this available, and that's really the main reason I have that in the presentation. So talking about history, and this will be quick, in 2008, the city, along with the other stakeholders in the Cayugas Creek watershed, spent $2 million to put together a TMDL, a salts TMDL, to comply with regional board pressures to come up with a solution, and the Regional Water Quality Control Board approved in 2008 that TMDL. Around that same time, the city had a project before you where we were seeking approval to build our own desalter as a city-only facility, and we realized after partnering with the region on the TMDL that there really needed to be a regional focus to this, and it needed to be a dialogue happening at the regional level. So we withdrew our application shortly after the TMDL was approved, and basically cited that we needed to be a partner to the regional effort, and joined up with other entities to do that. Now, before I continue on with the history, just to really, I think, give some clarity to the TMDL, I'm not going to go through all the numbers on this chart, but I just want to highlight a couple important points, and that is in the area where this brackish mound has occurred in Camarillo. 20 years ago, water quality was excellent, and of course we've had the surface flows with brackish water that have caused the ground levels to rise over 200 feet since then, and you can see the effect that it's had on water quality. We went from a very good water quality, and I'm going to use TDS as just the measure here, for example, and we've now gone to 1800, which is one of the reasons we needed a salts TMDL, because we're seeing the salts build up in the region that needs to be mitigated. And the resulting TMDL is requiring that we at least get the regional salts back down to, or the TDS back down to 850. This project that we're proposing, the North Pleasant Valley Desalter, is 40% of the overall solution in the TMDL. And for that reason, we're actually shooting for achieving the same water quality that we had 20 years ago. That's better than the TMDL, but it's what's needed as part of the overall strategy to comply with the TMDL. So in 2010, we kind of waited around. We were looking for somebody to step forward to really facilitate a regional discussion on moving forward with the salts management effort. Nobody was moving forward, so the city stepped forward, and we basically approached the group that we worked with to form the TMDL. Those were the water agencies within the Cayuse Creek watershed. And so in the past, when you've heard us talk about Thousand Oaks, Simi Valley, and other partners that are outside of the GMA area, which I think maybe gave some concern that we were going to be exporting from the GMA area, that's why those agencies were included in the dialogue, because they were part of the original effort to look at implementing the SALTS TMDL. Since then, and at your prodding, admittedly at your prodding, we met with Bell Ranch representatives, and they introduced us to American Water. And we're glad you did push us in that direction. In meeting with American Water, we realized they have a great experience that we can benefit from. They're very professional, and instantly we realized there's a great opportunity for a partnership to be formed, and we started moving in that direction. So they joined the participation list, but actually during that same period, because of limitations such as with LAFCO, it became clear in California that it's very difficult for a local agency to take the lead on solving a regional problem, because there are just too many restrictions in our ability to do that. And for that reason, some of the original participants backed out. There were some other reasons as well. And so that list of participants has now dwindled. And before I get to that, I just want to emphasize the LAFCO staff have been great to work with. They've done everything they can to try and figure out how to help us pass some rules that are really archaic. But in the end, we couldn't get through all the rules without having to make some adjustments, and I'll get into some of those adjustments in a minute. But finally, we ended up with what we're considered now to be our current partnership, and that is where American Water and the city would be equity partners. The plan is to extract and treat the water and use as much as possible within the Camarillo service area, but there will be, in order to meet the salts TMDL and extract enough water to meet the salts goal, there will be water produced that we can't use within our service areas, so Cayugas has agreed to purchase whatever water we can't use, and I'll touch a little bit on where they plan to serve that. So again, with American Water, the goal was to form a public-private partnership, and again we ran into, so we weren't just working on your homework this last year, we were working on all these, trying to cross all these other obstacles, and it's become very clear in California because of a lot of archaic rules that, again, the agencies admitted probably need to be updated. There really, at this point, isn't going to be a true public-private partnership that we can create as people would traditionally think it would appear. So we had to get very creative. And so what we've come up with is a 9,000 acre-foot per year project that's actually going to be two 4,500 acre-foot plants built side by side. Now, I know that doesn't make a lot of sense, and we wouldn't choose that format originally, but it's the only way that we can have a true partnership. We will own one half, and they will own one half, essentially, of a 9,000 acre-foot project. It works in this case because in a treatment plant, you have your modules, your different treatment trains. We can put some on our property, some on American Water's property, and some of the surrounding infrastructure we can share. So there still are economies of scale that we can achieve, and we do plan to have American Water operate both sides, in essence, of the plant, so we get the economies of scale along with that. So the environmental document that we've certified was based on a project of 9,000 acre feet, and we've checked with our environmental consultants, our attorneys as well, that say that as long as the environmental effects and the benefits haven't changed, and they haven't, it's still a plant planned to be sited in the same place. It's just the business model is a little different now. We're going to have two halves to it, different ownership for each half. So because of that, there wasn't really any need to change any of the information in the environmental document because it was all current and And so nothing's been modified to represent the 4,500 acre-foot side-by-side plants. It still is intended to be a $50 million overall capital investment for this project, and it would be, again, shared with American Water. The other part of this that has to work out, obviously, is it needs to be a financially feasible project. And in order to do that, we have to be able to produce water at essentially the same cost or better than what we pay for imported water. Otherwise, it would make sense to just continue to buy imported water if that was less expensive. And as we've looked at more updated cost estimates, we're kind of right on the border whether we're going to be able to achieve this. So that'll be one of our challenges is through the design process, is figure out how to build a plant that ultimately, when we capitalize and look at the operating costs, we can beat the cost of imported water. The current basically budget model that we have is the city pumps, and I've rounded numbers here, but our current groundwater allocation is 3,200 acre feet per year that we pump at around $300 an acre foot. And the additional demand that we have, we serve by buying imported water at $1,300 an acre foot. So because of that, in order for that to be able to sustain that financial model, we need to be able to continue to buy produce 3,200 acre feet of water at the $300 an acre foot, pump it in areas where the water quality is good, and then basically we'd be looking to replace the imported water with the treated brackish water. Just to give a sense of the impact of cutting back on our groundwater allocation, we actually were cut back. The Ordinance E was a 20% reduction, but the way the formula was put into place for Camarillo, it actually caused us to reduce by 30% our pumping of the groundwater at the $300 an acre foot. So in 2 years, our costs have gone up 23%. Our ratepayers' rates are 23% higher because of the impact of not being able to pump as much water at $300 an acre foot, replacing it at $1,300 an acre foot. So there are some real impacts here by not being able to pump a full allocation. And even if we were to reduce our allocation by 1,000 acre feet, that would equate to $1 million a year, every year more that we would have to pay pay for the higher treated water, and that would be too much of a burden on our ratepayers. So that's why when you saw earlier the GMA staff show that we've now looking to basically request that we can again pump the 9,000 acre feet in addition to our current groundwater allocation. These are basically a summary of the homework items. I'll go through each one fairly quickly. The contingency and monitoring plan, we've worked well with your staff. It was a good collaborative effort, and I think we've now arrived at a plan that is objective. So that was one of our concerns before on both sides, I think, is there was some subjectivity to the previous plan that left some unknowns. Now we have very clear triggers, very clear mitigation, and how that would be implemented. So there isn't really anything left to guesswork. It's well defined. And I think on both sides, with the GMA staff and with the city, we're comfortable with the new monitoring and contingency program. The environmental document, as I mentioned before, has now been amended to include the updated plan and has been certified. So this is zooming into the site that in the center of the slide is the, if I can see if this works. So right here is where we're looking to site the treatment plant, and the red line would be a connecting water line to Cayugas. The blue line is the Cayugas main that basically water flows to the west, and currently they deliver imported water through that line. The red connection is where we would plan, again, if we're producing more water than we can use in our service area, we would sell the balance to Cayugas. Cayugas then would deliver the water to customers west of this connection point, and all the customers are within the GMA service area. Cayugas is willing to provide a letter to the GMA staff if needed to confirm, to commit to only serving within the GMA service area. And then lastly, working with the stakeholders, when you look at the location of the brackish water mound, there are basically 4 owners of wells, and each of those wells have been impacted, and if need be, I can go through individually each of those impacts. But The 4 agencies are listed up there. Each of these, I should say stakeholders, are listed. Bell Ranch is a party to the team, the American Water team, and so therefore obviously a party to the project. Oxnard Union High School District is where we're looking to purchase the land to site the treatment plant, and we will be coordinating with them on their well and how to incorporate that into the project. Pleasant Valley Mutual is looking to build a treatment facility, and they would connect their discharge line to our discharge line, which is fairly close, so that they don't have to build a line all the way over to the brine line in Lewis Road, and that would be a savings to them. And then, of course, the city of Camarillo. So everybody really, in essence, has a stake in the project and certainly is supportive of the project. So one of the things we're fortunately able to do today is report to you that we have total stakeholder consensus within our area. And I think that's going to be critical for some closing remarks that I'll make. The monitoring and contingency plan also provides some belts and suspenders on this topic as well. The wells in the area will be monitored, and there are defined ways to mitigate if we do see some negative effects on the surrounding wells. There will be some strategies to address that. So this is where I talk about some of the scheduling constraints. In the TMDL, the salts TMDL, there was a time schedule order. And that was basically requiring that we have the desalter online and removing salts by the end of 2018. And there's actually I guess a sub-deadline there of, we were supposed to be in design last year. We didn't make that deadline. Obviously, until we have your support, we're not going to start design. And the regional board has been willing to work with us. We've been able to identify that through a design, build, delivery concept, we can catch up and still be able to make this deadline on operating the plant. And so they've allowed us to continue at this a little bit longer, but if we can't get support for the project now, we will have to let the Regional Water Board know that we're not going to make the TMDL deadline, and the TMDL will have to be reopened, and we'll have to look at other strategies and see where that takes us. We have a $5 million grant that we were supposed to have signed a grant agreement last fall. And only because of the great work of our grant facilitator and Lucy McGovern, we've been able to keep that grant alive. But we were aiming towards, actually last month, May, of hopefully getting your support so that we could sign the grant agreement. They're hanging in there just a little bit longer with us, but again, if we can't get your support now, we're probably going to have to forego the grant and have the money moved elsewhere, and that most likely would make our project no longer financially viable. Last year, we knew that the water quality in our 2 wells at the north end of the city were starting to diminish. The salts finally were reaching the level that we just could really no longer blend and use those wells for the level of production we had been accustomed to. That has continued to become a problem, and we're now to the point where we're only at about 10% of our original production from those wells. We have now pretty well moved all of our production, our pumping, to the west end of the city where the water quality is better. We're taxing those wells at the west end of the city. Temporarily we can do that, but on a sustained basis, if we don't go forward with our project now, we're going to have to look at some infrastructure modifications to allow us to continue to pump our allocation on a sustained basis. So where that brings us is next steps. And I'm going to pause for a minute and talk a little bit about the groundwater, the brackish groundwater policy. We appreciate that that's going to take a little more time, that in some other basins that there's probably a lot more work that people need to talk about. But we feel that this particular project can move forward because we've essentially achieved what a brackish groundwater policy would direct us to do. We've identified the stakeholders. We have stakeholder consensus. We've got a monitoring and contingency plan to show that we won't have detrimental effects to the basin. And we also have a groundwater study to really provide all the information needed on what is, defining the problem and what effects the solution will have. So we could wait for a brackish groundwater policy, but all that would do is give us guidance to get back to the same point we're at today. I think we have hopefully provided to you all the information you need to really weigh in on the merits of the project, and we would request that you do that ahead of waiting for a brackish groundwater policy to be approved. Again, if we wait on that, we're probably out of time anyhow. So our request is that if you do feel you can support this project, that you direct the staff to bring a resolution forward to your next meeting and your regularly agendized meeting in July. That would include a resolution that would basically be the agreement that defines the conditions and the authorities granted. And the basic authority that we're looking for, again, is to be able to pump 9,000 acre-feet of brackish water and basically use that in lieu of imported water. And so therefore it would be, in addition to our current groundwater allocation, it would be for a estimated 25-year lifespan project. Of course, that would be based on the monitoring and contingency plan, and if there are reasons to cut production in the future, then we would adjust accordingly. And then lastly, just I guess a technicality or a point to raise as far as the new relationship, the partnership, as far as how the authorization would be granted. Meeting with your staff, with American Water, with Bell Ranch and the city, we felt that rather than trying to parcel out the 9,000 acre-foot approval and decide who's going to provide monitoring for each of the two parts of the plant and who's going to provide managing the contingencies, the city would run point on that. So the authorization would be granted to the city, and then we would have a side agreement with American Water. That way your staff isn't put in the middle of our business model trying to manage that. They're just working with us directly to make sure that the proper reporting is occurring and the proper contingencies are managed. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Anybody have any questions? Dave?
Yeah. I didn't see you mention this, Tom, but what's the current amount of state water Camarillo purchases?
It's varied. So it's been as high as, I should start with, our demand has been as high as 10,000 acre-feet a year. With the drought and the conservation, we've been down around 8,000 acre-feet. So currently, we're just around 5,000 acre-feet a year that we're purchasing. If the drought ends and our demands go up, we could see that increase to as much as maybe 6,000 to 7,000 acre-feet.
So 5,000 to 6,000 from the state imported water project, and then 3,200 of your current local allocation.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, anything else? Anybody in the audience have any yes, ma'am. Tom, if it just don't go too far. There may be some questions you'll get to answer. Why don't you have a seat, because I don't know how many more questions we're going to get.
Jeanette Lombardo, California Food and Agribusiness Advocates. I'd like Tom to expand a little bit on the constraints he ran into with LAFCO. I thoroughly approve and like what I'm seeing here finally, but my problem is selling the water to Cayugas just to turn around and send it back into this area, into the east side of the county. So it's like, I don't understand why we can't change the rules of LAFCO to keep it either to PV, to the city of Oxnard, at least in this basin. So I'm trying to see if there's something that we need to fix for future projects that we need to look at now.
Yeah, good question, and actually there's been attempts made already. It's part of the government code. I don't have the exact section committed to memory, but in the government code, basically which has been legislated, it identifies that a local agency can only pump water from their area and serve it to their area. And so in this case, because we'd be pumping more water than we can serve to our customers, we'd be looking to deliver water outside of our service area. And that created a real challenge, particularly when we were talking about including partners such as Simi Valley or Thousand Oaks. And the way to be able to make this work and meet the LAFCO code is that Cayugas, their service area covers all of the same area as ours and beyond. And since they would be buying water that originated within their service area and delivering it to customers within their service area, two government agencies can work together to do that. But it was very strict in identifying two government agencies. A private entity is not eligible to be a partner in that sense. So I'm simplifying and over-summarizing the code, but it just created a lot of constraints that seemed to shut down all the other ideas and options we have. And I appreciate that, there would be an interest at the regional board level or any other level to once again approach the state legislature to see if they could amend that code to be a little more forgiving and a little more really accommodating of what I think we're going to all have to look at in the future are innovative projects. And I think that's what's happened is the old codes have really restricted local agencies from being able to be innovative and look to participate in regional solutions. So
let me ask a question. In your formal presentation, you made a comment that the excess, when it's available, would go to Kiegas. Kiegas would deliver that water west of the connection, not east of the connection. Is that true?
Yeah, good point. I think east was mentioned, and the intent was it would all go west. The pipeline flow only goes to the west, so it would only be to customers
downstream of Camarillo.
And to the west in the Fox Canyon service area.
It would not be delivered backwards to even Cam Rosa or anybody else north of that connection.
Correct. And Kiegas is even willing to put that in writing.
Okay.
Or
All right.
even, add to that, even city of Camarillo to the west?
We essentially serve most of the west two-thirds of Camarillo. So there are some smaller water agencies to the north end, and possibly, they could benefit from some of this.
I only ask that because that might be a question folks might have. Is that you're asking for an additional allocation, and you're going to put it in Kiegas pipeline just to receive it again in a different part of the city.
No, it would basically be to other areas within the Fox Canyon service area. Again,
Outside of the city.
Outside of the city.
I see. Thank you.
We need to explain, maybe you don't understand, that the creek, Kiegas Creek, separates, for all practical purposes, the Camarillo service area and the Cam Rosa service area. So the eastern part of Camarillo is not, those residences and businesses are not part of our service area.
Yeah, I
And
understood
we
that.
have to keep it in our service area.
My question was that it looks like the facility is near the hospital, and there is a good deal of the city to the west of that. And so if it was the intent to put it in the Kiegas pipeline just to deliver it to other parts of the city, that would seem to be disingenuous. But that's not, it doesn't sound like that's what's
That's
planned.
part of what LAFCO doesn't allow.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions?
I do.
Yes, sir.
Tom, in the groundwater model that you're using, increasing the pumping from 7,500 acre feet to 9,000 acre feet, any projected negative impacts?
The actual groundwater model looked at a total pumping up to one scenario of up to 12,000 acre feet a year, still with not much measurable difference in impact to the basin. I think in working with your staff, we felt that 9,000 acre feet was this balancing act to address their concerns that we don't overpump, but still address the TMDL concerns that we pump out enough salt to achieve the goals, the water objectives there. So it was somewhat of that middle ground to try and solve all concerns.
Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else in the audience? Okay. Thank you, Tom. Let's have a board, if you would, let's have a board discussion. Any comments from members?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask Tully, not asking, but I mean, I guess my comment it goes along with that is that it'd be nice if we actually have the brackish groundwater policy back here in July, and we have this project at the same time, so we actually have that. Of course, they're asking to go whether we have the policy back or not, but we've been working on this policy for quite some time. You said you think it's tight, but you can get it back. You feel like you'll be back with the policy in July?
Yes, we'll certainly put forth our best effort to make it to that July 20th meeting.
Great. Seems like that's
Critical, yeah.
that's the best thing to do, is to have both the policy in place and as the project goes forward.
First of all, I recognize a year ago when the city came before us, you came before us, that the position that the GMA took at that point in time was not the answer you wanted to hear. And I think it is a compliment to all the parties, to the city, to all the constituents, that they took our pushback, if you would, and re-looked at the issue. And I think that the plan that you've come up with today is significantly better than the plan you had in the future. And I compliment you on that, because this is the business we're in, of trying to make this system work for a whole variety of people. And you showed us the constraints in time back then. That was one of the underlying tones of everything you talked about last time, and I think the board took the right position in pushing back, and I think you've responded to it. So I compliment you on that. But that leads really to where, and first of all, I think that all the things that you've outlined, all the contingency plans, everything that you've worked with staff, I have no problems with those contingency plans per se. I have no problems with the outline of how you're trying to put this together. Where my concern is it's in the responsibility of this agency. And this agency's responsibility is to make sure that we meet the long-term objective of a sustainable system across all of our areas. That's our mandate from the state, and they gave us a sustainability mantra as an agency, Groundwater Sustainability Agency, and we're in the process of building a plan. My fear is that, and it's true for all projects going forward, whether it's your project, whether it's the county's project, whether it's United's project, I don't know. But I don't think this agency can predict the future with certainty. And because we can't predict the future with certainty, we have to make sure that our authority to do what our mandate is not put into some compromised position. And if you read the comments that I've read from constituents in the 2 meetings we've had basically on a lot of these issues, the comment is that we ought to stop everything that we're doing until we get that process in place. And I think what the board has been trying to do is to figure out how to actually move both down the road at the same time. So what I'm most concerned about is you folks have done a lot of work, and you have a lot of faith in the planning and the engineering that you've done in this project. Fantastic. I think the agency has to be put in a little bit of the what if. What if the state comes down and changes the sustainability plan, changes things that we, as an agency, are responsible for? What resistance do we have if we adopt a plan that does not somehow, some way, say to anybody, again, whether it's United, Camarillo, City of Oxnard, PV, you just go through the laundry list of folks that are trying to figure out how to solve their problem. And we essentially cuff ourselves of not being able to make adjustments in the future. That to me is the concern. So in this staff report here, they're asking for guidance and feedback. And my feedback would be somehow we need to come up with some kind of quantifiable statement that effectively says, although we have not approved or may not approve simultaneously a sustainability plan because of just the nature of how these things have to work their way through, we recognize that we will always be subject to the authority of the GMA to make adjustments based on the facts given the circumstances that are before us in the future. And I appreciate that you've built into this plan contingencies that says, hey, if the model doesn't work and we go down at a certain level and therefore we have cutbacks, and I think you said, and I think it's a true statement, that you think you've met the intent of what a sustainability plan would have in it and have the ability within that plan to cut back as necessary to meet changing environments. What we don't have in that draft, I don't think, I have not seen it, is the specific statement that says this project is approved subject to the understanding that if the state changes the Groundwater Sustainability Act and the effects of those changes have effects on our project as we've planned it, we're subject to those changes. I don't, and I think that addresses what I talked about last month immensely. What we heard last month immensely is, essentially, if you boil it down, we do not believe it's fair to give any entity, fill in the blank, it applies to everybody in the county that's doing these kinds of things, which are all good projects, a get-out-of-jail card. Because at that point in time, you've basically handcuffed the GMA to do its mandated job, and that is to reach sustainability, long-term sustainability, long after the 25 years is done. This is going to be our way of life forever. And I have no idea what creative thoughts will come down from the state. I have no idea what creative thoughts will come from Mother Nature and what it may or may not produce in terms of rain in our aquifers. 5 years of a drought, there's no guarantee that we're going to get rain next year or the next year or the next year. I don't know. So that would be my only real pushback at this point, is that somehow whatever projects we approve from this point forward need to make sure that there is something in there that speaks to the fact that it's the agency's responsibility to be able to exercise its authority and not be restricted by some decision it made 5, 10, 15 years in advance based on the circumstances of that time. Now with the state changing the rules and the environment changing the rules, environment being rain, and usage changing the rules, we have to be able to react to that. Does that make sense? Is that what I'm saying? Yes, ma'am.
I think that's something that needs to be considered. I think that if you make it too tight, nobody will be able to get financing for a project. Tom didn't say it, but the reason that you cannot move forward with public-private partnerships, which the governor really wanted everybody to do, is because I think it's rule number 94 that the IRS has, that or the Department of Treasury, no federal money can be given to a private agency. So you can't build with any grants, whether they come directly from the federal government or whether they go through the state revolving fund, which is really federal money. You also cannot sell tax fee bonds to be used for any project where part of that will benefit a private company. Those rules, to get changed, are going to take some doing. So in order to sell those bonds, or to get especially selling bonds, because nobody's going to get a grant for the full amount of a project that costs $50 million or $25 million. You have to have a local match. And sometimes the local match is selling bonds, or however agencies want to do it. If you make it too tight, which is what happened last time, nobody will buy the bonds. Nobody will touch them. So you have to be careful about saying any change that comes down the road 25 years from now or 25 years from now, the bonds would be paid off. In our case, they might not be in the case of another desalter or another project. But you have to take a good look at the impacts. If something came along in 15 years and you said, well, this isn't working, we're going to absolutely shut you down, and that doesn't take into consideration the monitoring plan, it's for another reason, I think that people will take a good hard look, and bond brokers will take a good hard look, and probably it would mean there wouldn't be a project. So I think you have to have some language that balances what you were talking about.
I would agree you have to have some language that balances, that doesn't kill the economic viability of the project. I understand that. But doesn't prevent the agency from doing its mandated job. How do you put some recognition? I mean, in theory, if the timing was different, and it may be the timing will be different depending on what happens next month, but if we actually had a policy in place that said our policy would be to condition projects with the understanding that things may change. We're dealing with a lot of unknowns here. And
Yeah, if I could make
Yeah.
a suggestion, in both good points. I understand trying to protect the GMA's interests, but also we do have to have a project that's viable and we can get financing. There is in bond covenants some fairly standard language about the fact that if state federal laws change and the rules change, that the project could have to be adjusted because of that. And perhaps you could request that your staff and the city work together to see if we can borrow from that and maybe craft some language to present back to you next month.
so, okay, you were going to talk?
In Kathleen's presentation, there was a slide that talked about monitoring and contingency plans, and there was a specific reference to a 5-year horizon where the plan would be reviewed every 5 years. It says for refinement. You could also have for refinement and to ensure compliance with applicable law.
Somehow in the contract or the resolution of this board, there needs to be in that resolution an absolute acknowledgement that the agency is acting as the GSA for this area, and in that capacity, it has fiduciary responsibility. These are my words, so there's attorneys out here that lead it alive. Gene will lead it alive. Our fiduciary responsibility is to ensure that this aquifer, all aquifers, are sustainable by whatever that definition is when we get to the plan, and have the ability to modify and adjust the plan. That was built into the law, that the monitoring process and the adjustments would have to go ongoing. We have to make sure that whoever builds a project recognizes that's our responsibility. And at the same time, not make them financially non-feasible. I get that.
I just have a few more things I
Yeah.
wanted to say. Tom mentioned that we started this in 2005. I think we actually started it earlier than that. I can remember Bob Westdyke, who was then our Public Works Director, talking about Lucy was hired to start this project. So the city of Camarillo has been talking about it for 15 years. We've only had an official application since 2005, and then for a while it was pulled in 2008 while we worked out some part of a disagreement. And during this time, our water levels in Camarillo have gone down. I can remember it was about 1988. We had to lower our wells 285 feet. More recently, pretty recently, we've had to make them rise them again because the water level has risen 200 feet in that area, while other parts of the aquifer, the water levels have gone down. The problem is that the water that's come in, that's migrated from the eastern part of the county, is very polluted. And so it isn't like we're wanting to pull out a lot of water that people can use. We want to do something with water that is coming in and is polluting more and more and more. And that plume, when I first saw it, was just up around the hospital and the Bell Ranch area. Every time I see it, I think, or every couple of years, it's getting bigger and bigger. And now it's down below Las Posas Road, and it will continue to go if somebody doesn't do something to pull that water out. But I think another important thing is to reemphasize the TMDL. If we don't get approval soon, I think our council has talked about it, and we're just going to have to pull the plug and go back because everybody has to be involved in solving the TMDL problem, and it has to be solved by 2019. And I think that's something very important to recognize. And this plume is a big part of that problem. So I guess that's all I had down to reemphasize.
Steve?
This project's a good project for the city of Camarillo. Yeah. This project is a good project for our region. So this project, we should try to have this project go forward. At the same time, we can't do anything that puts us in a situation where somebody comes back and says, oh, you can't touch our 9,000 because we have this allocation. That's why I appreciate there is a contingency and a monitoring plan, and I can't imagine that anybody that purchases bonds for somebody that's pumping groundwater doesn't realize that there is at least some risk that groundwater might not be available to pump, whether it's this agency or whether just physically the groundwater. So I don't think this has to be that hard. I shouldn't say nobody's making it hard, but I think this is all very doable, and that is we put into the resolution it's going to be subject to to what we're doing. I don't think that it's going to be very different what we come up with. It's going to be very different from the monitoring and contingency plan the staff has. Bottom line is, if we see adverse regional impacts, the project's going to have to be adjusted, and we would be doing that adjustment. So I think we can accomplish the win-win, something good for Camarillo, something good for the region, something that still protects the Fox Canyon Groundwater Agency's ultimate mandate to move forward and still allows you to sell the bonds. It seems very doable because I'm not hearing anything in here that suggests what has to be added to here is either a deal killer on either side. It seems like it can be done, and it'd be great if it all could come together and the brackish groundwater policy be there. So I would support Director Mulhart's, Chairman Mulhart's comments about adding that language, and I think it makes sense for staff to talk with the city and try to add that language that works to do that. It seems like it's all very doable.
I just have a few feedback as
please.
well. I agree. This could be a win-win project, and I've been a long supporter of this project, and my hat's off to Camarillo for being willing to step up and make the investment of time and energy. And these projects are a big deal, and as Camarillo has demonstrated, they go on a long time, and so great work, and so I'm hesitant to say anything negative, but at the same time, my second bit of feedback is that there was a slide up there that indicated the stakeholders in the project, and the one stakeholder that was missing, in my opinion, is the farmers to the south in the southern part of the PV Basin. And the withdrawal of 9,000 acre-feet is going to change that hydraulic pressure heading in that direction. Now, does it affect those people? I don't know. It doesn't seem very clear at this point. There seems to be some contingencies or some in the contingency plan, there seem to be some thoughts about watching that on wells south of the project and what's happening to that gradient or that flow. But I think there has to be some consideration of, in reality, many of our basins are connected. I was talking to a friend the other day who likened them to bathtubs we all have bathtubs that are interconnected, and straws pulling from one bathtub is going to affect the next bathtub downstream. And so that seems to be an important consideration and an important stakeholder that needs to be part of this project. And maybe the answer is that, in fact, we talk often of wanting to reduce pumping in that area of the Oxnard Plain. Maybe there's a way to wheel some of that water through Cayugas to those entities or to some entities that are interested in buying it. And that becomes a win-win-win at that point. So I would encourage the city and then the other partners to continue and investigate that part of that option or possibility for the project as well.
As I look through the recommendations from staff in our agenda packet, here a presentation from staff, did that. Receive an update project from the representative of the city. Tom, you did that. Provide staff, agency staff, and city with feedback. We're having that discussion, so we're moving along. Then it says receive and file. You asked for some specific items to get it on the agenda sooner than later. And as I read the conclusions, and Kathleen said it in hers, the final plan has not was not available at the time the staff report was written, so it is not clear if the plan fully mitigates. So if we get it on the agenda, if we say to staff, put it on the agenda, we ought to revisit this issue. For sure it should be on the agenda. We ought to revisit this issue next month at the designated time. We've got to make sure that we've had a chance to review the plan, that Al has reviewed it, the staff has reviewed it, everybody understands what that is so they can make their formal recommendation to the board. We've heard about drafting some kind of language in there in the resolution which talks about the things we talked about. And you had indicated that the flow of water would be to the west in the Kiega service area. I don't know if it has to be absolutely west. I don't know if it can go 3 blocks back to the. I don't know the answer to that. I'm not being that nitpicky. I think the concern is that it should not be migrated well up north, outside, obviously outside the GMA or boundaries, or outside the areas that it would have served. I guess I don't know how to say it, but we need to make sure that issue, that staff is comfortable with that issue, that you're comfortable with which way that goes. We have a policy executive committee meeting scheduled prior to the board meeting to deal with policy issues. And but it's not on this one. No, that's not. The executive committee meeting is not on this issue. It's on the other issue. Well, it's still a policy issue, right?
You can bring it to your board.
Yeah, okay. So from what you, all right, so the big thing you're asking for today, I think the city is asking for today is, can we get it on the agenda for June 20th? I don't see any problem getting it on the agenda. July, I'm sorry, you're right. On July 20th, get it on the agenda. I'm okay, and I think I'm hearing from the board that's what we ought to do. But there's some workload things that have to be done to put it in a position for us to act, and if it means, frankly, that it's small, minor things, the commitment I'll make to the city, if it's small, minor things that we have to clean up after the 20th, and we have to have a special board meeting to do that, then we'll have to do that. My intent is not to put the city or this project in jeopardy. My intent is to make sure the project is correct, not only for the users, but for the agency to continue to do its job, and its job is to act as a protector for all of us, whatever that may be. Does that sound okay to you, what I'm proposing?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Jeff, do you understand what I'm proposing?
I do.
Okay. Members understand what I'm proposing? Anybody have any problems with that?
You didn't mention my concern, but I think staff has heard.
Yes, it includes the concerns that we've all addressed. It's listed as a receive and file, so we'll need a motion on that, but staff now has heard what the direction should be for the next event. And so at that point, we're in a receive and file motion. Anybody want to do a receive and?
So, second.
Okay, a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Roll call.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Vice Chair Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director West?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Okay, let's go back up to item number 2.
Good afternoon, Chair Mulhart and directors. I'm Tully Clifford, the Assistant Executive Officer, and I'm here to discuss the fiscal year 2016-2017 work plan and budget. The fiscal year 2016-2017 work plan is included as item 2A, and it summarizes major work tasks, activities, and project deliverables anticipated during the next fiscal year. The work plan is comprised of 2 sections, the annual operations and special expenditures. The work plan includes a description of the proposed tasks, labor estimates, and contract estimates where appropriate. The annual operations include administration and fiscal services, record keeping and data management, technical support, legal services, and public outreach. We try to provide a description so that your board and the stakeholders understand where money is being spent on labor and contracts. This year, we've included additional funds for legal services in the annual operating budget, given the preparation of the GSP and unanticipated events that may occur. On the special expenditure side, we've included funding and staff time to complete the GSP, to complete the Las Posas water replacement study, and to prepare specifications and plans associated with the advanced metering infrastructure project. We have not yet had the discussion relating to the cost of the project and how it will be funded. We would return to your board for a budget adjustment at the appropriate time for that. The staff labor estimates and contract costs are then rolled up into the annual budget, which is included as item 2B. And just in summary for the budget, we have a beginning operating balance of $1.1 million, operating revenues of just over $1.7 million, operating expenses of just over $2.4 million, a contingency of $100,000, and an ending operating fund balance of just over $307,000. It's important to note, however, that we also have designated accounts where money is being held. One is GEMS, which is the Groundwater Extraction Management Enforcement Surcharge, and that's just over $1.5 million. Surcharges just over $700,000, and an operating reserve of $1 million. What you will have noticed is that the budget includes increasing the groundwater sustainability fee from $4 to $6.50 per acre foot. If approved, this would then become effective on January 1st, 2017. If the fees are not increased, the agency will experience a budget deficit beginning in the next fiscal year. And what I've done just to demonstrate that is I included a budget included as item 2B, which shows if the total pump fees are held at $10. And that's why we're recommending actually increasing the fee. With the start of the fiscal year on July 1st, 2016, we're therefore recommending adoption of the fiscal year 2016-2017 work plan and budget today, with direction on a corresponding groundwater sustainability fee increase as suggested. If your board directs the increase in the fee, staff would then undertake the appropriate noticing, prepare a resolution, and bring the matter to the July 20th board meeting for approval. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have on the work plan or the budget.
Okay. We did have a fiscal committee meeting. Dave.
So, as chair of that committee, I can report to you that we did have some robust discussion. Mr. Molhart and I vary slightly in opinions of things, but we are of a similar mind, I believe. To clarify, first, when Tully indicates a deficit of $300,000, that's, I mean, I guess there's still $1 million year's worth in the budget. So, I mean, we should make that kind of clear. It's not like doom and gloom in 1 year. Nevertheless, a point I made in that meeting is that historically we've received reports of this nature that if we don't increase pump fees, we're going to start running deficits and we're going to spend down all our money. And historically, we've also proven that that hasn't been the case for a variety of reasons, most of them good. Staff's been very busy, and many times we just can't get to all the things we hope to spend the money on. Nevertheless, Mr. Molhart and I did agree that we've got a lot of things on our plate. We've got the AMI program and the funding and implementation of that. We've got no doubt additional GSP activities related to stakeholder involvement, implementation. There's going to have to probably be additional staff hired for that. And so it seemed reasonable that there would be a modest increase in that fee. Mr. Molhart recommended that we pursue a kind of a graduated path, not a huge jump in fees, something that people could kind of project for and think out in the future. And so that's why you see on the documents the indication of the the move from $10 to $12.50 to $15. I'm not necessarily in agreement with that path as described in these documents as regimented, each year we're going to do that increase. But I am willing to go along with the initial $12.50 for the 2017. And so with that, if anybody has any questions or discussion.
I will just comment on Dave's characterization of the meeting, and I think it's correct. I'm aware that we're only adopting a budget for the 16-17 year. I'm making no commitment that in the 17-18 year it'll go to 15. We'll have to see what it is when we get there.
Fine.
But I do know now that with the amount of workload, the building the GSP is only one part of this process. The second part of the process is we got to implement it. And when that GSP is done, we ought to have staff on board before that happens who have been trained in what that document is and what it entails, so that the continuity from having a plan and continuing that plan and making sure that we meet our targets is important. And I'm concerned about large jumps, and I think the 250 is a modest number to give us the funding to add additional staff. We actually have slots right now that we haven't filled, and we need to fill those, and we need to ramp up for that process. And so that's why I pushed for the 250, and we had a lively discussion on that issue. So that's where we are. Anybody else any comments before I go to the audience, or questions or comments? Audience, comments? Okay. What would you like to do?
Yeah,
I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Chair, I just have a statement, and I think I've made it before. My feeling about increases is that costs are always going to go up. And I think it's better to increase, even if you have to do it every year on a small basis, than to wait years and years and have to really jump it up. Nobody likes the big increases, so I certainly think we need to go with an increase because our workload has increased and our operations have increased, and you shouldn't be using reserves for operations.
Okay. All right. I didn't hear anybody in the audience. Who wants to make a motion? Okay. A motion
Second.
and a second. Did I hear that? Motion and a second. Any other discussion? Jeez, what am I bumping into? Roll call.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Vice Chair Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director West?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go now to item 4.
Chair Mulhart and directors, I'm still Tully Clifford. I'm here now to provide an update on the groundwater sustainability plan preparation. And I just want to preface my comments by stating that I believe the process we're following is working. The stakeholders are engaged and they're working towards finding solutions. They're not working towards finding ways of stalling the process. They're tackling difficult issues and are making good progress. My concern is in regards to our consultant Hydrometrics. Since the project began, we've had a difference of opinion with them regarding the scope of work and how it relates to the GSP regulations. The regulations were first issued as a draft and seem to include new terminologies relating to the preparation of GSPs. After substantial public comment, the regulations were revised and were approved by the state on May 18, 2016. Again, however, there were still terminology differences. From our perspective, we didn't see this as critical, as we still need to determine how much water is available and how much can be pumped without undesirable results, regardless of what terminology you use. Unfortunately, the consultant felt a substantial increase would be required in the scope of work and the budget to accommodate the requirements of the regulations, and we disagree with them. Additionally, we felt that the consultant could have done a better job of communicating with us and working with the stakeholders and the technical advisory group to fulfill their obligations, rather than indicating most everything was outside their scope of work. Some of the initial draft documents and reports prepared by the consultant were less than stellar. They appeared to be, in some cases, cut and paste jobs which missed many of the inputs from the technical advisory group. Finally, we're concerned that their inappropriate interaction with your board may not have led to a successful result. Accordingly, I'm here in front of you with my GSP update then to ask your board to authorize the executive officer to terminate the contract with Hydrometrics and to authorize the executive officer to negotiate with the next responsible bidder, DUDEC, to complete the GSP. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, questions? Questions? Anybody in the audience? Terry.
Yes, Terry Foreman, Camarosa Water District, a member of the TAG committee. And I selected this item on the agenda because it seems to be the most appropriate for making the comments that I have. I don't really care whether you hire the consultant or not, but I think it brings up some bigger issues with respect to the TAG. I think Mr. Clifford's characterization of the process is going well. Might be a little bit more optimistic than maybe what it is, at least as far as I see the TAG operation going. I guess I'm not really surprised that we're at this point to see the concern about the scope and schedule and budget in the contract. I think it could have been I think it was predicted. I think Director West actually predicted that this day would come, maybe not to the extent of the termination, but certainly disagreement over what's in the scope, what's not in the scope, that kind of thing. And I don't want to stand up here and complain. I'd like to give you some constructive feedback. Having been on the TAG now for nearly a year, I'd like to give you some constructive feedback to think about how we move this process forward. We're dealing with some very tough technical issues. You talk about the uncertainty and what's going to be in the DWR's regulations in the future. I think we have uncertainty in what's in the regulations today. We're still trying to interpret what it is they have in those regulations and what exactly is going to be required. So the fact that there be disagreement over interpretation of what those regulations require between the consultant and staff and so on is no surprise. And again, I think we could have predicted it. So I think if we go back a little bit and sort of review how we got here, that might be helpful for context. First of all, as you know, each one of you appointed technical advisory committee members, hopefully with the idea that they would be people that you trust and have confidence in terms of their technical abilities. And so when we started the process, the first thing that we started to do was to look at putting together an RFP, to select a consultant, and to ultimately make a recommendation for selecting that consultant. We did provide some input to an RFP, but once we got the proposals and read the proposals, and I want to remind you that those proposals were limited to 25 pages to respond to an RFP that was over 16 pages long. So how you could provide detailed information in 25 pages on such a complex subject is really not possible. It just tells you that you have some capabilities. So we recommended that we interview the top 3 consultants, and for whatever reason, the technical advisory group was taken out of the process. We weren't involved. We had lots of questions about how they were going to do things, how they were going to do a water budget, how they were going to do projections in terms of analysis of seawater intrusion, how they were going to do subsidence analysis, because none of those things could be spelled out in literally 5 or 6 pages of technical approach to address all these issues we've been talking about. So the TAG, and if you recall, at the public comment period regarding selection of the consultant, I made the specific comment that the TAG was not involved in the technical scoping that was put together. So we had lots of issues. We did look at the website, obviously. We downloaded the scope of work and had lots of questions, lots of concerns about what specifically was going to be done. But at the same time, we were working on a charter for the technical advisory group. And in that charter, it specifically says that one of the responsibilities of the TAG committee is to prepare tasks for the consultant to do. So our expectation as the TAG was that we would provide input to the tasks that would be done because we have the experience and understanding of what needs to be done. And we started to do that. And we've had some pretty good discussions over the last few months. It's really gotten started after the first of the year. We really started getting some information in February. Tully says the products were less than stellar. Well, given the schedule we're on, that's really not to be surprised. This is just the reports for chapters 6 through 10. The reports for chapter 1 through 5 are about as long. So they were working hard. I don't fault them for not trying to produce something on the schedule. And then we were expected to review all this material within a couple weeks upon receipt. We extended it to give us a month, but most of the technical advisory committee's members have day jobs, so this was a lot of work for us to do as well. So anyway, we weren't involved in that. We fully expected that there would be need for revision of the scope of work, the schedule, the budget. I came here in April and requested you to kind of give Tully and the staff some relief on the schedule because clearly we were producing stuff too fast. It wasn't quality. The consultants were doing the best they could to try to bring the information together, but I think they were relying on the TAG to really try to fix stuff. And that just didn't make sense and doesn't work. So anyway, clearly we expected there was going to be a lot of changes. So for staff not to believe that there were going to be changes, we could go through the scope of work if you'd like and point out. It says that they're going to rely on the TAG. We're going to develop methodologies, technical approaches, acceptability of data based on TAG input. So how could they know what we would believe would be acceptable methodology? How would they know what would be acceptable approaches? We didn't talk about it. We didn't negotiate that contract with them or discuss that contract with them. But we did when we started the actual meetings. We told them we had concerns about what they were proposing to do. And I think still didn't have a great idea as to how things were going to be done. And then the regulations came out, and that threw a whole new wrinkle of questions into it. For example, you have to produce 50-year projections using data that DWR will provide for hydrology and so on. How could they know that? How could we know that? And we're just learning that. So when Director West made his observations when the contract was approved in the first place, he had a lot of the same concerns that I'm talking about now, and again, basically showed what was going to come down the road if we go down this path. And I think he suggested that we have a scoping meeting and we get those items on so everyone understands what is in the scope, what's not in the scope, what we are going to leave to a future date to work out, and what we can't work out. As far as the charter goes, we spent a lot of time working on that charter, and it was sold to the board, and I think the TAG, as a way to make sure the communication would be effective. Everyone knew the roles and responsibilities of what they were going to be doing, and we agreed to the charter. And we've been told on multiple occasions the charter is coming back to a sign indicating acceptance by staff, by the board, what have you. We still don't have the charter today. I don't know if you've agreed to it or not. I don't have it. It was going to be brought back to the TAG, so I guess posting it on the website is bringing it back to the TAG, then that's nice to know, but I didn't know that. We've also specifically asked that we have access to the database that the consultants would be working with. Information on production, water levels, water quality, etc. And we've been told that numerous meetings that that the county or staff would be working on a way to access that data. it's kind of hard to be a technical reviewer when you don't have access to the data that are being used to come up with and do the analyses that are being done. And we still don't have access to the data, so we have to accept what's being given to us as what it is. Again, we repeatedly, within the TAG meetings, discuss the challenges of the schedules, discuss the uncertainties about what is going to be done. And again, I brought this to you in April. I thought we had some agreement that we can take our foot off the gas pedal if we need to. We want to do a good plan. We don't want to just do a fast plan. We do want to do a good plan. And I'm committed to doing a good plan. I volunteer a lot of time. I spend a lot of time. I'm semi-retired, so I do have the time I can put into this, and I've tried to. And again, I think we had some good workings within the TAG meetings, but it seems like we get some agreement. For example, in the, I believe it was the April meeting, staff asked for volunteers from the technical advisory committees to look at the scope, schedule, and budget and see what was different and what might need to be changed based on TAG's concerns about what was being proposed and the regulations. That meeting never happened. Brian Bonney and I both volunteered to assist in that effort. The next thing I know, I come to the next GMA meeting here, and I'm told that they're working with a consultant and that one of the options is to terminate the contract. I was in shock. It's like, what happened? But anyway, I don't know why that activity was never undertaken. And so now I understand that they're proposing, and that's for you to decide, to terminate the contract. But it seems that they're talking about bringing that contract to the next GMA meeting. We don't have a TAG meeting this Friday. It got canceled for whatever reason. And there's not going to be a TAG meeting before the contract's brought to you, so I'm assuming we're going to start the process all over again. And I guess I see us going down the same road again. So I guess maybe as a TAG member, I would appreciate understanding what you really expect from the technical advisory group. How can we be most beneficial to the board and each board member to make this process produce a good product? If you want staff to do it, then direct them to do it. We'll step aside and we'll just come up and make comments like this if you prefer. But if we're not going to have input to how the work is done, and I understand there has to be some limitation on that, but to just kind of wait till it goes down the road and then we have to provide input like this is really not very, very productive. And I don't know if any of the other TAG members would like to speak, but I know that there's a lot of general feeling like that. We actually had a couple of tasks that we proposed at the last TAG meeting that were going to be brought back, I thought, to the board today. Obviously, that didn't happen. So anyway, I think the process is maybe not as good as it may be being portrayed in the last few meetings. I would like to think that we've made some progress. Like I say, it seems like we have pretty good discussions in the meetings. It seems like after the meetings, things change, and then we see different things coming to your board. So one of the things I would like to see is more interaction with at least some of the board members. I know Director Borchard came to an actual TAG meeting. He's probably bored to tears, but and they go long. We run a full 3 hours. Generally, you leave hungry. So anyway, it sounded like maybe I was complaining, but really I'm hoping I'm providing some constructive feedback that hopefully we can maybe find a better way to collaborate together. I don't know what's driving the schedule as much. The plan's not due till 2020 for Pleasant Valley and Oxnard, and 2022 for the other basins. So we have the time to do it right. And I know that a couple of major groundwater models are in process, and I think are going to be completed this year. At least that's my general understanding. And I think we still have a lot of questions about how we're going to address a lot of these questions without those tools available to us. If you look at the groundwater sustainability plan regulations, the implication is you're going to use a groundwater model to get at some of these issues, because the state even recommends or offers to provide their groundwater models to the agencies for use and technical assistance to apply them. So, and then lastly, a lot of information is still yet to come. A DWR is working on best practices manual that they're hoping to get done by the end of the year. I assume within that they'll be providing data that we will use. The expectation is they're going to provide us with a 50-year hydrology. They're going to tell us because they want us to account for sea level rise. They want us to account for climate change, whatever that means to them. So there's still a lot of unknowns as to what we're going to be looking at in terms of analysis. And I still have questions about how we're going to do some of those analyses. And I've got 30 years of doing nothing but this kind of work. So anyway.
Okay.
So I would just, again, like you to receive this as constructive in hopes that we can find a better way to, we won't end up, back here in another 3 or 4 months firing another consultant because we think there's a difference of opinion. I wasn't privy to those discussions, obviously, so I don't know what the challenges were. But it's not exactly a surprise to me that we find ourselves where we are.
Okay, thank you, Terry. All right, anybody else want to comment?
Chair, I'd be interested if any of the other TAG members had anything to offer. Or
Anybody else? I said it. Jeff, Tully, any comments or anything? Your recommendation before the board is that we terminate one contract and direct staff to negotiate a replacement contract with the second ranked, or the consultant that came in ranking number 2.
That's correct.
Okay.
And do I understand correctly that once you negotiate that contract, including the scope, it'll come back to the board for approval?
Yes, we would bring that to the July 20th meeting.
And will the contractor be here to answer questions about the scope at that time?
Yes, they will.
Thanks.
Okay. You've heard comments from Terry. And you guys go to the meetings. I have specifically stayed away from all of these meetings because I talk too much. That's a good thing to stay away. That's my goal.
I'm glad you said that, not us.
But if I hadn't have said it, you would have said it. Charlotte's over there waving her hand at me so she can say it. I can see it out of the corner of my eye. So, Charlotte.
That's not what I was going to
I know. I'm teasing you.
I was going to say that my city we're a contract city, so we operate by contracts. We have 137 contracts on a regular basis and a lot of other special contracts such as this. We even have a whole department that's contracted out, and people think they're talking to city employees. But in my capacity as one of the city representatives to the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, I have been attending their meetings for almost 30 years and was on the board for 11 years. And I just wanted to say that I don't have any personal contacts with the DUDEC people, but I have heard reports that other agencies have had, and I have heard presentations, and they seem to be very good, responsive contractors.
Okay. All right. Yes.
If I could just real briefly, and it's a reiteration of what I've mentioned to this board before, but that this time schedule that we're on, we hear repeatedly over and over, particularly by our technical advisory people who we've all appointed because we think they know what they're doing. They're telling us that the schedule that we've set in place is impossible. It's undoable. And if we don't get this initial part right, particularly this technical part, so that all of the stakeholders that we represent can buy into it, I think we're setting up for failure right off the start. I know there's been a drive to keep the foot on the gas pedal, and I agree with that sense of drive. And I'm not saying let's take the foot off, but I'm saying let's not make this a situation where staff feels compelled to reach an arbitrary point in time that maybe doesn't have any representation about what this work is going to take. And I don't know what it's going to take. we hear a lot of different things. Maybe there needs to be some sort of a little meeting with TAG members and staff. Maybe a couple of board members attend. But this schedule, these deadlines need to be adjusted if we're going to do this thing right. So I just would reiterate that point. And in my mind, this is an opportune time for us to achieve a reset on this thing. And we have time to do it. Let's do it right. Let's get good buy-in. Let's have all the stakeholder groups be able to know that their people were able to make the input that they needed to make, and let's get this done right.
Mr. West, will you back off your 1 year?
It wasn't my idea, but
You demanded it at 2 or 3 meetings.
I guess my response is that my response is that you can always change the end time. I'm not totally convinced now is the time and place to do that. And what I'd rather do, my take on this, is that staff is hearing this conversation. They're hearing input from some folks, in this particular case, one individual, but we've heard this before, from a director. Director West has indicated this concern, and we're going to renegotiate a contract with a new contractor. And I would expect that at that July 20th, if we can get an agreement with that consultant, that this will be a major portion of the conversation with that consultant. And that's the second, third bite at the apple, if you may. So I don't want to presuppose what that consultant can or cannot do. I don't want to presuppose what staff can or cannot recommend. They've heard the discussion. It's a real discussion. It has ramifications in a variety of areas. Staff has heard that discussion. They have to negotiate with this new consultant a scenario that gets us where we want to go, and let's see what comes out of that consultant's recommendation. And that consultant, we would expect, needs to be here and probably is going to get quizzed extensively by folks in the audience, I would assume, or folks up here. And they ought to know the parameters by which we're going to review this awarding of a contract. And I think that's the appropriate time and place to have that discussion of what adjustments we have to make once staff has the opportunity to chat with the consultant, figure out what the dollar number is, and make their recommendation to us, and then game on.
Chair, a few quick points. One, I think our policy is that we want to work with all deliberate speed, but we've made it very clear that we will slow down wherever we have to make sure we get a quality product. So when we just heard staff saying we're not coming forward with the brackish water policy, which was we asked for today, but so consistently we've already pushed things down the road. So my understanding is we have a policy, but the policy puts a priority on it's got to be quality work, but then try to do it as promptly as possible. And that gets me to the second thing. Why do we even need to do things as promptly as possible? I just want to remind everybody, because I have to remind myself sometimes, why are we in a hurry? You have people say you don't have to get there until 2020, et cetera. We're in a hurry because we're in a drought and because we have an emergency ordinance out there, and we were just about ready to go at each other's throats over the emergency ordinance in terms of what to do. And we said, let's take a time out. Why should we fight so hard and make really hard decisions here that are temporary about the drought and how we're going to deal with that when we could roll that into a more comprehensive program? But we're on borrowed time here. We didn't get the rain that we expected in El Nino. The cry could be raised at any time. What are you doing? You're not adjusting for this drought. And we intentionally said we're going to just kind of pass on that because we thought we could do this quickly. Now, if somebody says this is going to take 5 years for us to do, then we've got to go back and revisit the fact that we're in the drought and we haven't come up with the appropriate reductions that that need to be made given the drought. And yeah, there's supply, but it's going to be a long time before we get new supply to really come online. So I just want to remind us why. But there is a balance between those two, and but if we take our foot off the gas altogether, then I think we have that other question that I don't think anybody in the room wants to really visit those hard things at this point in time. And so I want to get to the final point that I want to make, and that is that I appointed somebody to be on the TAG that had technical expertise, not because I wanted them to pick the consultant that we're going to use. So I think there's just been some misunderstandings here. I don't know what the charter says. I'd like to have the charter again, and I probably need to revisit it. But does the charter call for the TAG to select the consultant? I'll just ask staff that question.
No, it does not.
Right. And so that gets into a policy question. Who's the consultant going to be? That's got to be something that we're comfortable with, because that consultant's got to work not just on the TAG, but they got to work on all of these other issues that are out there. I want somebody that I trust from a technical expertise standpoint to say when they come up with numbers or when they suggest technically, are these basins connected? Does this figure seem like a realistic figure when they're saying, what parameters should be in there? That's the kind of stuff that the TAG can discuss with the consultant, can discuss with staff. So I just want to be clear, that's what I'm looking for. And I can appreciate there's misunderstanding out there. And I want to just say that I thought your comments were spot on in terms of trying to capture the tone of being productive and not being complaining. So I really appreciate the way you said it and how you kept emphasizing. You're just trying to make this thing, and here you are, you're volunteering your time and you're just trying to move the thing down the road. We should welcome those kind of constructive comments so we know, hey, we've got to be clearer with the TAG what we're looking for, what we're not looking for. Ultimately, we have to move forward here, and there's all kinds of reasons, not just because of tight time frame, that problems have cropped up with this particular consultant. And hopefully we have staff that's run contracts enough to know they're not going to run into those problems again. They're going to make sure we don't run into those problems. So I'd be ready to make the motion, but I hope those comments are, again, offered constructively, not complaining, but just try to remind, at least that's where I see why we are where we are. And it's a difficult spot to try to do a major plan on a time frame to avoid having to do a short-term plan. But unlike all these other sustainability ones that have been started, we've been out there for 20 years. And so as we moved into the drought, we had a greater responsibility to say, we've got our act together and we're going to do something. And so we're trying to square that circle to some extent. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement. I'm interested in doing the speed limit, not 90 miles an hour.
Sure. The comment. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry if I didn't mean to interrupt. But we've heard from the community on both sides of this issue with hydrometrics. Somehow the word got out. I don't know. Probably the consultant did it. But we would welcome any comments, direction to include from anybody before the 20th to make the 20th a more productive meeting. So we're not surprising anybody with anything. So I'd offer to Terry or anybody else who wants to send us their comments, and we'll see that they're addressed inside the scope or in the meeting. So, get them to us post haste because we want to work on this quickly. So,
Jeff, any possibility before the 20th to put the TAG together with the prospective new consultants so they could make sure that they're all of like mind as far as scope and methodology and things of that sort?
There's a chance that we could get them together.
Okay, it's fine. You're right. Agreed.
And then,
maybe I might add that even, excuse me, Jeff, that I just, sorry to interrupt you, but maybe it's inappropriate for the TAG and the prospective consultant to be put together at this point, but it would seem more appropriate for the TAG and staff to have an honest discussion about, what the technical people think the time required is.
Well, I was just interested in having the consultant here so that we don't wind up having this conversation 6 months from now. If there are genuine issues with respect to the scope, with respect to the methodology that the scope anticipates, and those aren't going to become apparent until the new contractor comes up with his first set of reports, let's address that now. Let's get that out on the table and make sure everybody's anticipating the same things so we don't get surprises later.
I appreciate the discussion we're getting into, and I will comment on some of the things that Steve said about time. It's not news. It was in the paper. The lawsuit that Wichita has filed against United is monumental. It's in federal court in Los Angeles. It's going to cost us millions to deal with this. And the ramifications of that lawsuit have huge ramifications for all of us going forward. And that is only one of the entities that are aligning against where we stand in this county that United has to deal with. So if we go to those entities and we say to them, we're working on it, we'll get there in 5 years, that is not flying in federal court. Part of our argument is we are working on this problem against a state mandate. We've had a history of working on this problem. Being in federal court and leaving it up to a judge is not the answer to our long-term survivability in this world of water. The folks that are in the public that have the ability to do these kinds of actions have funds far exceeding United's capability. United, by the way, is a $20 million agency, and one of the entities that we're now dealing with has a budget well north of this county's budget. And the things they're asking for are draconian in all measures. Time is not on our side. We've got to get these problems solved. The data has been looked at and reviewed for a long period of time. Is it perfect? No, it's not. But us moving forward quickly, correctly, on the speed limit, not in some direction, and to have some entity basically give us a proposal that blows the budget completely out of the ballpark, literally out of the ballpark, I think says we got to do something different. Does that mean add time? I don't know. Let's see what staff, the consultant, staff input, everybody's input. The easy answer is add 5 years to this, add 4 years, add 2 years. I am telling you that from my perspective at United, that is a losing hand. And it is a major losing hand, and we're battling it right now as we speak. It's in the paper. So I didn't tell you anything you don't know. That lawsuit from Wichita is monumental. And we've got another lawsuit sitting at the Supreme Court. So we've got to get these problems solved.
I'll move the recommended action.
So we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Aaron?
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Vice Chair Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director West?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Okay, let's look at item 5.
Good afternoon, Chairman Mulhart and directors. For the record, my name is Kathleen Rydell. I'm here to present item 5, which is a public hearing to consider an application for exception from the temporary prohibition on new extraction facilities for the City of Oxnard's proposed aquifer storage and recovery project pilot test well. So as background, Emergency Ordinance E was adopted by your board on April 11, 2014, and the City of Oxnard is requesting an exception from Article 4, which is a prohibition on new wells. This is a new well, but it would be only for aquifer testing and to collect data on, it would be to collect, to be able to evaluate conditions at the site locality and then the aquifer properties at that site. It is estimated that it will take about 20 acre-feet to do the construction of the well and do the aquifer testing. The 20 acre-feet would be reported to the agency in their semi-annual extraction statements and would be included as part of their allocation, their temporary extraction allocation, which is reduced 20%. We gave an update previous on this project, and to go back over that, the project site is located east of the Oxnard Airport. It is in the Oxnard Plain Basin. It is south of the Santa Clara River and south and west of the 101 freeway. The forebay is here, which is a recharge area for the upper and lower aquifer systems. So it is not near the recharge area, which is relevant to this discussion. The analysis is included in my staff report, and so not going back over that, but per Emergency Ordinance E, applications for exception to the moratorium on well permits, and then quote from the the ordinance code, shall conform to the requirements of sections 5.2 of the agency code and will be approved only if the board makes the findings set forth in the appropriate section of the ordinance code. It states that the board, in approving a well permit, can impose conditions. These are the proposed conditions. They were included in the staff report. They are the standard conditions with the exception of number 7. This permit is for an aquifer testing phase of the program for design purposes only. The use of the well for other purposes will require a permit review for compliance with the ordinance code. So the board may approve the proposed use if, after a public hearing, it finds that the proposed use will result in no net detriment to the basin or any subbasin or aquifer associated with the use, by determining that, so you need to determine either that the proposed use does not result in material degradation of water quality of any type, or recharge to any aquifer within the agency is not materially diminished. Once again, this is not in the recharge area, and we're talking about 20 acre-feet that will be reported with their reduced TEA, temporary extraction allocation. And then further, as stated, in granting approval to projects subject to this subsection, the board may impose conditions as appropriate, including limitations on quantity of water use, term of the approval, and periodic reporting to the agency.
Okay, can I interrupt for 1 second, Kathleen?
Sure.
Al, this was listed as a public hearing to consider application for extension of a temporary prohibition, as she discussed. At what point should I have opened up the public hearing? Is this part of the public hearing, or only comments that people make?
You would open the hearing at the conclusion of the staff report.
Okay, all right, thank you. And maybe if I just read it up there, I'd have had the answers.
Okay, it is staff's recommendation to hear the presentation regarding the well. And then we also have, after this, we have City of Oxnard representatives here to answer any questions you may have, to hold the public hearing on the application, and to grant an exception to the Emergency Ordinance E, Article 4, drilling moratorium with permit conditions. Those are our recommendations.
Okay, all right. So the formal words as I open a public hearing, is that what you want to hear? All right. Let me open up a public hearing to consider an application for extension from temporary prohibition on new extraction facilities, City of Oxnard's proposed aquifer storage and recovery project pilot test well. Anybody from Oxnard want to speak on that? Okay, all righty. And we have the staff report before us. Okay, so back to you, Kathleen. What is your recommendation?
Close
Our-
the public hearing. Close.
Oh, let me close the public hearing. All right, it's closed.
Okay, staff's recommendation is to grant the exception to Emergency Ordinance E, Article 4.
So move.
Motion and a second. I think this exemption is exactly what Emergency Ordinance E was designed to exempt, if that is such a word, so I'm okay with it. Anybody else? Anybody else? Aaron.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Vice Chair Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director West?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Item number 6. Hello there.
Good afternoon, Chair Mulhart and directors. For the record, my name is Alma Quezada, groundwater specialist for the County of Ventura Watershed Protection District. Last month, staff was directed to continue work on the proposed AMI ordinance and review stakeholder comments. We have made revisions to the ordinance based on stakeholder feedback, and staff feels it's still in need of work. The most current revised ordinance is available on the agency website, and we've also provided copies here today.
Okay.
We are continuing to improve the proposed ordinance as input from stakeholders is received. Stakeholder input was received as recently as yesterday. Staff is also conducting a more detailed analysis of implementation costs and how those costs can be distributed between the agency and the well owners or operators. Staff was recently approached by other vendors, and we are reviewing alternative technologies for AMI implementation. Today, staff is recommending this item to be continued to the September meeting. Continuing this item in September will provide more time for stakeholder input and will provide staff with more time to review alternative technologies for AMI implementation from other vendors. That's it.
Okay.
Question,
Yeah.
Chair?
Yes.
Was the desire to explore other vendors because you perhaps see deficiencies with the current one you were looking at, or just to have a broader range of options?
It's to have a broader range of options and to know that this is the most, we want to make sure we're getting the most
Do the
cost
research.
effective. Yes.
Yeah,
We're doing
may I
our due
elaborate on
diligence.
that?
Sure.
So originally we were approached by a consortium of these people, Semtech being the leader, and as it was presented to us, there was no other technology that could compete. That's becoming less true as time progresses because they created a standard and they invited people to join. So now that's one issue. And then others in the community, stakeholder community, said, well, we've implemented something that sounds just as inexpensive and just as reliable. And that's news to us because we haven't heard of these. And then added to that, because the word's out, I guess, and all eyes are on us, there have been just independent approaches to us from vendors with other products. And it's a little bit overwhelming right now in trying to sort out what the true costs of any of these things are in the final analysis. So this is just trying to get the best handle on it we can before we make any recommendations to your board.
Great.
Okay.
Glad to hear it.
And you'll bring it back to the July 20th?
September.
I'm sorry.
September, because we're presuming at this point there won't be a meeting in August.
Okay.
But yeah, but
That is
September, we would like to have September if your board will allow it.
That's a gutsy assumption. You are a gutsy guy, right? Yes, we'll have a meeting. Okay, so staff's recommendation is to move it to the September meeting. Am I hearing any objection to that? No. Okay, so ordered.
Sorry, Director Chair Marholt, would that be the special September meeting or the regular September meeting?
What is your yeah, there's the answer.
What is my recommendation?
But
No, let me make that recommendation. Noam and I discussed it. It was the special meeting in September. So
okay. When we have the meeting on it, we need to have the answers sorted out to the highest level of fidelity you can And if it means you don't put it on a special, you put it on the regular, wherever you need to put it so we can get to the answer, okay, and make a decision. All right, there you go.
Special.
Okay, and the last item is, thank you, Alma. The last item is administrative reports. Any questions on any of those items? A motion to receive and file.
Second.
And a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, so ordered. Okay. On this board agenda, it has Wednesday, July 27th. It is now July. The meeting will be adjourned to the regular scheduled board meeting for Wednesday, July 20th at 1:30, room to be determined.
Mandy went back and got the room for us, so we'll be in this room on the 20th.
Excellent. All right, very good.
Chair,
Very good.
before you,
Hold on.
before you adjourn the meeting, I just throw out a quick, I'm very sympathetic for United's plight with the current legal challenges, and it seems prevalent on this agency that we ought to, in whatever way we can, support United in this cause. We really are talking about the future of a large part of our county's water supply. So any way that GMA can get behind United's effort, County Board of Supervisors, City of Oxnard, particularly the cities that are affected with recharge in the forebay, these are all of our issues. This isn't just United's battle to fight alone and we just kind of read about it in the paper. I mean, we all have a stake in this deal. And I think it's really time and it's appropriate for us to weigh in.
Okay.
I agree. I think every one of us, whether we're in that immediate area or not, needs to weigh in.
One of the most important things, and I appreciate your comments, I think one of the most important things that we all can do to help in this issue is to keep doing what we're doing and not lose track of our efforts. As aggressive as it is, as many meetings as we go to, it's not designed to simply wear people down. It's designed to solve a problem. And that is, in my opinion, very important when we deal with this issue in front of the judge, that we are not screwing around on this process. And so I encourage all entities, whether it's a city or other agencies, there are entities out there that have a different view of where we ought to go as a county. And it's difficult. Okay? All righty. Very good. Anybody else before I go? You go. We all go. We go. You go.